In a small suburb of an American city, where the streets were narrow and lined with old trees, lived a young girl named Tasha. She was 20 years old in age when life is just beginning, when dreams are just starting to unfold, and the world seems full of possibilities. Tasha stood out not only for her natural beauty, deep brown eyes, and thick curly hair, which she often wore in a high bun, but also for her inner strength, which was evident in her every movement. She had always been someone you could rely on, despite all the difficulties her family faced. Her family was small but close-knit. Her mother, Marie, was a woman of unyielding character and a big heart. After her husband died tragically several years ago, she took on the responsibility of not only raising Tash, but also caring for her younger brother, Jeremy. Jeremy was still a child 7 years old, with a mischievous look in his eyes and boundless energy that often filled the house with laughter, even on the most difficult days. Marie worked as a nurse at a local clinic, and her schedule was demanding, but she always found time for her children, trying to compensate for the loss of their father, whom they both loved and remembered dearly. The house they lived in was simple but cozy. It was a small brick house with several rooms, surrounded by a small garden where Marie grew flowers and a couple of tomato plants. This house was their fortress, a place where, despite the hardships, there was always warmth and love. The lights were often on late into the night, either from the lamp where Marie did her homework with Jeremy, or from the desk lamp where Tasha read books or prepared for college classes. Life in the suburb was, on the whole, peaceful, though not without its problems. The neighborhood where they lived was old, built decades ago, with houses whose facades told stories of past generations. The residents were mostly African American, many of whom had known each other since childhood and supported each other in difficult times. Despite this, the neighborhood faced economic hardship. Local stores were closing, young people were looking for opportunities closer to the city center, and safety was becoming an increasingly pressing issue. In the evenings, the streets would sometimes empty too quickly, and many had to be careful not to run into trouble. For Tasha and her family, these realities were part of everyday life, but they did not allow them to break down. Tasha was a student at a local college, studying sociology, dreaming of one day helping her community overcome its accumulated problems. Her days were filled with studying, part-time jobs, and household chores. She often helped her mother around the house, took care of Jeremy, and supported her loved ones and friends. Despite all the challenges, she was a ray of sunshine for her family, a source of strength and inspiration. An important part of their lives was their connection with their neighbors and the local community. Marie often participated in volunteer projects, organized assistance for those in need, and looked for ways to improve their neighborhood. Tasha grew up in an atmosphere of mutual support and unity, which instilled in her a sense of responsibility and attachment to the place she called home. Her heart was full of love for this neighborhood, despite all its challenges. Family evenings at their home were special. After a hard day's work, Marie would gather the children around the table, and they would eat a simple but delicious meal together: fried chicken, cornbread, and fresh vegetables from the garden. In those moments, they forgot about all their problems. They talked about their plans, dreamed, and simply enjoyed each other's company. For Tasha, these moments were a source of strength, an inner light that helped her move forward without losing faith in a better future. However, not everything was so rosy. The loss of her father left a void in their family that was difficult to fill. Tasha often remembered his stories, his voice that sounded in her memory as if he were nearby. These memories were both painful and comforting. They motivated her to be strong for her mother and brother. Sometimes a shadow of sadness appeared in her eyes, but she always hid it behind a smile and determination. Her mother, Marie, though tired, never complained. She understood that family was the top priority and fought every day for their well-being. Her hands were covered with small wounds from work and housework, but her eyes shone with determination and love. Jeremy, despite his young age, already understood the seriousness of the situation, and his childlike innocence sometimes lightened the heavy atmosphere, bringing joy and relief. The area where they lived was surrounded by greenery, old oak and maple trees that painted the streets in warm colors every fall. The air often smelled of damp earth and flowers. A small river flowed nearby, where children from neighboring houses played in the summer and adults gathered for evening conversations on the porch. It was a world where, despite external difficulties, a special harmony and spirit of community reigned. For Tashi, this suburb was not just a place to live, it was her roots, part of her soul. She knew every corner, every path, every face in the neighborhood. She understood that her strength and future were tied to this place, its people, and its traditions. Her desire to learn and grow was not only a personal desire, but also an attempt to make the world a better place for those around her. Meanwhile, Despite the mundane and cozy family life, there was something intangible in the air, as if change was approaching. Marie often looked at the clock, rushing to finish her work so she could spend time with her children. Tasha was getting ready for another day of school, unaware that her family's life was about to change and that she would have to face uncertainty and trials that would test her courage and faith. Thus began the story of Tasha and her family, a story of ordinary people whose hearts were filled with love and hope, despite the shadows of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Their home and neighborhood remained their foundation, and their bond was their greatest resource in the face of whatever challenges fate might bring. Evening was approaching, and the soft light of the setting sun painted the sky of the suburban neighborhood in warm shades of orange and pink. Tasha had just finished helping her mother with the housework and was about to take a short rest before preparing for tomorrow's classes. However, her thoughts were preoccupied with the task Marie had given her. Her evening chore was to take a small basket of groceries to an elderly neighbor who lived on the outskirts of the neighborhood. Although it was a routine errand, it made Tasha feel uneasy and anxious. The neighbor's house was called Jerry's. He was an elderly man known among the residents of the neighborhood as a man with a difficult life. Many remembered that he had once been energetic and sociable, but over the years he had become increasingly withdrawn. Several months ago, rumors began to circulate that Jerry was seriously ill and in need of help, but he rarely left his house and hardly spoke to his neighbors. Marie, an attentive and caring woman, took it upon herself to look after Jerry, visiting him regularly and leaving him food, but sometimes she needed help. And that evening she asked Tasha to take a basket of dinner to his house. The road to Jerry's house ran through a remote and rarely visited part of the neighborhood. This part of the district was different from the center. The houses were fewer. The streets were poorly lit, and at night a special silence reigned, sometimes broken by strange sounds. Many people in the neighborhood avoided walking there in the evenings, especially young women. It was said that in recent months, inexplicable events had been occurring in the area. Pets had disappeared without a trace, and in the darkness, someone had seen shadows gliding between the houses. Although most people were skeptical about these stories, the rumors still heightened the sense of unease among the residents, especially those who had to pass through these places after sunset. Tasha knew these stories and had heard about the strange occurrences on the way to Jerry's house more than once. Her younger brother Jeremy, despite his young age, once told her that he had seen something strange in the window of that house, and the neighbor children said that strange noises and voices could be heard around the house at night. Of course, Tasha tried not to pay attention to these rumors, but a voice inside her constantly warned her of possible danger. When dusk fell, Tasha took a basket from the kitchen, carefully filled with homemade food, fried chicken, vegetables, and fresh bread. Her heart was beating a little faster than usual, but she knew she couldn't refuse to help. Marie looked at her with slight concern, but she knew she trusted her daughter. Tasha sighed, picked up the basket, and headed for the door. Stepping outside, she felt the cool evening air wash over her face, bringing with it the smell of damp earth and fallen leaves. The way there wasn't as easy as it had been during the day. The narrow path leading to Jerry's house wound its way through tall grass and bushes, some of which were overgrown with thorny branches. The trees seemed to cast deeper shadows, and the last rays of the sun shone dimly through the foliage. The wind rustled the leaves softly, creating strange sounds that made Tasha look back. Every rustle caused a slight rush of adrenaline. Because of the rumors of ghostly figures wandering around this part of the neighborhood, she tried to walk quickly without stopping. As she moved further away from familiar streets and houses, her feelings of unease grew stronger. The street lost its familiar comfort, and the air seemed heavy, as if filled with the anticipation of something sinister. The streetlights flickered and did not always illuminate the path completely, leaving parts of it in darkness. Tasha knew she had to be careful not to trip, but also not to show her fear. Thoughts raced through her mind about how she should hurry up and finish her errand and get home. Despite all this, Tasha noticed unusual details. Scraps of paper and plastic bottles lay scattered along the edges of the path, and in some places stones had been moved, as if someone had recently passed by, but quickly left. There were noises here and there, a slight rustling, as if animals were hiding in the bushes, and sometimes strange sounds came from somewhere that could not be explained logically. It felt as if this place had a life of its own, secret and unpredictable. When Jerry's house finally appeared around the bend, Tasha felt mixed emotions. The house stood on a small hill, surrounded by a high fence made of old boards that creaked in the wind. The area was deserted, with no voices or car sounds to be heard. The windows of the house seemed dark and deep, as if silence and cold were staring out from inside. Despite its simplicity, the house exuded a strange atmosphere, as if it held secrets and mysteries that no one was supposed to uncover. As she got closer, Tasha noticed that the door was locked with a heavy metal lock, unusual for such an old building. The lock looked new, shiny, and heavy, as if it had been installed specifically to prevent anyone from entering or leaving without permission. This made her feel uneasy. Why would an old man's house have such a lock? What was he trying to hide? Tree shadows gathered around the house, and cracks in the walls, and peeling paint added to the feeling of abandonment and neglect. However, when Tash appeared, a faint light came on in the window, an old lamp that she immediately noticed, like a beacon in the darkness. The light was both inviting and reassuring, as if inviting her to enter, but an inner voice prevented her from relaxing. As she was about to knock on the door, Tash took a deep breath, trying to overcome her fear. In her mind, she replayed her mother's words and reminded herself that these were just nighttime fears caused by rumors. It was more important to keep her promise and help her elderly neighbor who needed support. The basket of food seemed heavy, but at the same time it was a symbol of care that had to overcome any fears. As she stood at the doorstep, night had almost completely fallen. The silence grew deeper, and it seemed as if time had slowed down. Tasha could hear only her footsteps and her rapid breathing. In the distance, the lights of houses flickered, but this section of the street remained in darkness, as if forgotten by everyone. She realized that the way back could be even more dangerous than the way there. Her heart ached with anxiety and uncertainty, but she was determined to fulfill her mission. At that moment, she did not know that trials awaited her that would change her life and reveal the secrets hidden behind the walls of this old house on the outskirts of town. It was only the first step on a path that would reveal the hidden sides of a world where light and darkness intertwined in the most unexpected ways. When Tasha crossed the threshold of Jerry's house, she was overcome by a strange sense of silence, as if the very atmosphere inside was saturated with long-standing loneliness and some kind of hidden anxiety. The room was small and modest, the furnishings simple and somewhat outdated, but with a touch of neatness that suggested that the owner was still trying to keep things tidy despite his illness and age. The walls were covered with faded wallpaper. An old carpet with burnt spots lay on the floor, and the furniture, a few armchairs and a small wooden table, looked worn but carefully arranged. The old man who opened the door seemed much frailer than Tasha had imagined. His skin was wrinkled, his eyes deep and dark, looking both tired and alert. Despite his advanced age, he watched his guest closely, as if trying to read her thoughts. Although the atmosphere seemed tense, there was something unexpectedly kind and mysterious in his gaze. Jerry accepted the basket of food with gratitude, and Tasha noticed how carefully he arranged the food on the table. His movements were slow but precise, as if every little thing mattered to him. The room was quiet, except for the soft crackling of logs in the fireplace, which was the only source of heat and comfort in the house. Tasha felt like both a guest and a hostage in this space where the past and present were intertwined in an inextricable knot. One detail immediately caught her attention. The massive wooden door leading to one of the rooms was locked with a heavy, antique-looking lock. Its iron rings and fastenings glinted in the light of the fire, and it seemed that this door was not just a barrier, but a real border between worlds. None of the neighbors could explain why the old man had put such a lock on the door or what was hidden behind it. For Tasha, this mystery immediately aroused mixed feelings, curiosity on the one hand and fear on the other. The room where Tash was invited had a special atmosphere. In the corner stood a small desk covered with books and old papers, many of which were dusty and yellowed with age. On the shelves were strange objects, wooden figurines, painted amulets, and old photographs in worn frames. All these details created the feeling that the house was not just a dwelling, but a kind of repository of stories and secrets intertwined with legends and mysticism. Tasha tried to ignore the slight feeling of unease that was gradually growing inside her. She understood that, despite Jerry's apparent kindness, something was not right here. The lock on the door and the many strange objects hinted that the old man was keeping something more than just memories of the past. The sudden silence in the house seemed filled with unspoken words, hidden secrets, and unsolved mysteries. Her gaze fell on an old map spread out on the table. It was faded and covered with numerous notes, lines, and symbols that resembled signs from ancient myths rather than ordinary geographical indications. The map seemed to tell the story of long-forgotten events that had taken place right here, in this neighborhood, in the heart of their community. These details only heightened the sense of intangible danger, as if the shadow of the past was hovering around, ready to return at any moment. Even more disturbing were the ancient books with worn bindings and covers engraved with incomprehensible symbols. Some pages were covered with mysterious writings and drawings depicting scenes from myths and legends, battles with dark forces, rituals to exorcise spirits and protect against evil. It seemed that Jerry was not just a sick old man, but someone who had spent his entire life dealing with something mysterious and dangerous. Tasha noticed a small bag on the shelf with dried herbs and plants that were usually associated with healing and magical properties. These details added to the image of a house filled with an unknown power and a deep connection to traditions that had been almost forgotten here but still lived on in the hearts of a few initiates. A sense of antiquity and mystery permeated every corner of the room. Tasha's attention was also drawn to a strange wooden totem, a carved figure with intricate patterns that radiated a cold energy. It seemed alive despite its immobility, reminiscent of something ancient and powerful that demanded respect and caution. Her heart sank at the feeling that this object held some dark secret capable of changing everything she knew about her neighborhood and about Jerry himself. The old man told her stories about his life, about distant travels, losses, and struggles with invisible enemies. Although his words were soft, there was an underlying heaviness and bitterness to them. These stories seemed both intriguing and frightening, as if Jerry was trying to prepare Tash for what lay ahead. His voice was tinged with the sadness and wisdom of a man who had seen too much and experienced too much that could not be easily explained. At times, it seemed as if the house itself was a living organism, watching over its guests and keeping its secrets. The silence was broken only by the sounds of the fire in the fireplace. But even these sounds were filled with a special meaning, creating a backdrop for what was happening. Tasha felt the tension mounting, as if something invisible was approaching. And now she had to make a choice: trust this place or try to leave and save herself. Suddenly, the lock on the door clicked softly, attracting her attention. She realized that this moment was not accidental. By locking the door, Jerry seemed to symbolically shield her from the outside world, inviting her deeper into mystery and the unknown. This act was a turning point. A new chapter in Tasha's life began, full of trials and enigmas. The strangeness of the house, the unusual objects, and the mysterious atmosphere created an impenetrable veil around her, behind which lay ancient forces and secrets capable of changing the fate of not only one person, but the entire neighborhood. She felt that she was on the verge of a discovery that would mark the beginning of a journey of courage, faith, and struggle against darkness. It was at that moment that Tasha realized that this evening would not be like any other. Jerry's house became a place where she would encounter the unknown, a place where the past and present intertwined, where she would have to face her fears and find the strength to move forward. A feeling of anxiety and anticipation merged into one, opening the door to a world she had previously only dreamed of or feared. Night fell rapidly on the suburbs, plunging them into deep darkness, broken only by the flickering streetlights and the soft light coming from the windows of the houses. Inside Jerry's house, where Tasha was already waiting, the atmosphere was becoming increasingly tense. Despite his age and vulnerability, the old man offered her a place to stay for the night. This gesture was both a sign of concern and hidden anxiety, as it was not easy to return along a dark and dangerous path at such an hour. Tasha, feeling mixed emotions, realized that agreeing to stay the night was the only sensible choice, despite her growing sense of unease. The room she was shown to was small and modest, with thin walls through which she could sometimes hear the sounds of the house, the quiet creaking of floorboards, the crackling of burning wood in the fireplace, and even vague, barely audible rustling noises that created a feeling of something invisible being present. The bed on which she was to spend the night was simple, a mattress covered with an old but clean blanket. The light from the lamp cast soft shadows on the walls, which seemed alive, swaying and writhing as if breathing with the house. As Tasha settled onto the bed, her thoughts swirled in a whirlwind. She tried to focus on rationality, to reject the fears that rose from the depths of her subconscious. However, the surrounding silence and the mysterious objects in the room intensified her sense of unease. The old lock on the door seemed not just a metal barrier, but a symbol of something that was not supposed to get out. Tasha sensed that something powerful and dangerous was hiding behind it, but she couldn't understand what it was. Shortly after she lay down, the house began to make strange noises. The walls swayed slightly, and there were quiet creaks and twists, unusual for a normal house. The air felt heavy, filled with invisible vibrations of energy that were difficult to explain. Sometimes a cold wind blew through the cracks, making her shiver even with the windows closed. These sounds and sensations created the illusion that the house itself was alive, and Tasha was just a guest in this unfamiliar world. Time dragged on slowly, increasing the tension with every passing minute. Tasha couldn't sleep. Thoughts of the house, the castle, and the strange things around her kept her awake. She heard soft whispers, barely audible, like voices coming from the void. In some places, it seemed as if the walls were breathing, expanding and contracting, as if trying to say something or warn her. These sensations made her heart beat faster, awakening a primal fear of the unknown. Shadows appeared in the room. Seeming like living creatures, they crawled around the corners, thickened and dispersed, creating the feeling that the space around her was constantly changing and transforming. Tasha tried to ignore these phenomena, but they still captured her attention, stirred her imagination, and intensified her sense of danger. She felt as if an invisible force was watching her, testing her inner strength. Hours passed, and the house seemed increasingly alien and hostile. Tasha noticed strange figures flickering in the semi-darkness, vague lights flickering in the corners of the room, and shadows gathering near the locked door. Her fear turned to anxiety, and her anxiety turned to panic. She realized that she was trapped, not only physically, but also spiritually. This house had become a place where the boundaries between reality and the mystical blurred, where the past and the present merged into one. The lock on the door seemed like an impenetrable barrier separating Tash from the outside world and her family. This feeling of confinement caused claustrophobia and despair. She tried to find something in the room that could help her open the door, or at least attract the attention of her neighbors, but everything was in vain. Every sound behind the walls seemed like a sign of approaching danger, every rustle a threat. At that moment, the house was filled with another, particularly eerie sound, a quiet but distinct creak of the door that cut through the night's silence. The lock began to turn slowly, and the door began to open as if an invisible hand were pushing it open. Tashi's heart began to beat faster. Fear and terror overwhelmed her. The silhouette of Jerry appeared in the doorway, but there was something unknown and unpredictable about him. His eyes, which had previously seemed tired and soft, now sparkled with coldness and unfathomable power. Tasha felt panic rising. She instinctively backed away, trying to keep her distance and find a way out. However, the door slammed shut behind her with a dull thud, and the lock clicked, signaling complete isolation. The house had turned into a trap from which it seemed impossible to escape. Fear paralyzed her body, but at the same time awakened hidden forces, the desire to fight and find salvation. What was happening seemed not just a physical threat, but a collision with something otherworldly and dangerous that sought to consume Tasha entirely. She felt the room filling with an energy unlike anything earthly, cold, viscous, enveloping everything around her. An inner voice told her to act quickly, or there would be no chance of escape. In a panic, Tasha began to search for any weak spot, a window, a closet, any opportunity to escape. Her gaze fell on a small window, barely visible behind an old curtain. It was old, and had not been used for a long time, but at that moment it seemed like her only salvation. With effort and desperation, she began to open it, trying to free herself from the trap. At that moment, the shadows in the room seemed particularly sinister, as if trying to hold her inside, preventing her from leaving. Finally, the window gave way, and Tasha, overcoming her fear and the pain from the scratches on her hands, climbed out. The fresh night air hit her face sharply, bringing a feeling of freedom but also anxiety. The night on the street was full of uncertainty. Without looking back, she ran away from the house, rushing along the path, listening to the footsteps behind her, which were getting closer and closer. The escape seemed endless. Tasha ran, breathing heavily, blood pounding in her temples, her legs barely supporting her tired body. The darkness around her seemed alive, filling the space, trying to stop her. But the desire to return home to her mother and brother, to safety and light, gave her the strength to overcome her fatigue and fear. When the familiar lights of the neighborhood finally appeared in the distance, her heart calmed down a little. Tasha knew that ahead of her was the house where she was expected, and where she could find peace. But the memory of Jerry's house, the castle, those sinister moments, and the unknown force that had pursued her would remain in her soul forever. This experience changed her, made her stronger, but also left deep wounds. For Tasha, the night was not just a time to sleep, but a trial she had to go through, encountering an unknown evil along the way. That evening marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter of struggle, of searching for answers, and of liberating not only herself, but the entire neighborhood from the dark forces lurking in the shadows. Panic and fear gripped Tash when the lock on the door clicked shut, separating her from her only path to freedom. At that moment, the realization of complete isolation from the outside world hit her instantly, like a cold shower, awakening her to action. Everything inside her cried out to flee, to escape. But the space around her seemed more than just a physical trap. It breathed an ominous energy, holding her in its grip. In the room where Tasha found herself locked, the walls seemed to close in, the air becoming thick and heavy. The shadows became alive, moving and changing shape, like dark entities feeding on fear. Desperate attempts to find support and a weak spot turned into a search for anything that could help her escape her confinement. Every detail of the room, from the old curtains to the furniture, seemed like a potential key to salvation, but everything had been carefully thought out and arranged against her. A strong sense of hopelessness weighed on her mind, but an inner voice refused to let her give up. Tasha knew that the chances of success were slim, but she couldn't back down. A determination grew in her heart, fueled by her love for her mother and brother, for her home and the life she had to protect. This moment became a test of her will and courage. Her gaze fell on a small window, partially hidden by an old dusty curtain, behind which a thin strip of the night sky was visible. The window was low, and it seemed that it could be opened. Despite her fatigue and fear, Tasha rushed to it, realizing that this was her only way to freedom. Her fingers struggled with the window lock, which had not been used for a long time and was rusty. But her desire for salvation gave her strength. Finally, the window gave way, and fresh, cool air rushed into the room, refreshing and invigorating her. Her heart pounded, filling her body with energy for one last push. Tasha quickly freed the window and prepared to climb out, ignoring the scratches and pain from the sharp corners. She knew that any delay could cost her life. Leaving the room, she found herself on a small patch of land behind the house, where dark silhouettes of bushes and trees created a maze of shadows and light. The night around her was silent and cold, the air filled with rustling sounds that seemed to be following her. But in her heart burned hope and a thirst for salvation. The way back along the narrow path seemed endless. Each step Tasha took was accompanied by the echo of her own breathing and the sound of her feet clinging to branches and stones. Flashes of light in the distance, the lights of neighboring houses grew brighter. But the distance still seemed enormous and impassable. Sounds filled the darkness, filling her soul with anxiety, footsteps approaching her, but she couldn't tell whose they were. The shadows seemed alive, as if someone or something was following her, trying to stop her escape. Every sound made her shudder. Every shadow made her ready to defend herself. Tasha ran without looking back, driven by a single desire to return to the safety of her home and loved ones. Despite her exhaustion, the pain in her legs, and the burning fear, she couldn't allow herself to stop. This run was everything: her life, her future, her hope. Suddenly, the path led her to a familiar street lined with houses with lit windows, and the sounds of life, music, conversations, children's laughter. The contrast between danger and comfort became more and more palpable, emphasizing how close freedom was. Tasha felt the tension ease, but not completely. Fear still haunted her, preventing her from relaxing. When she reached her house, she struggled to open the door and rushed inside, where she was met by the concern and love of her mother and brother. Tasha was exhausted and frightened, her body trembling from the horror and ordeal she had experienced. But she was surrounded by those who were ready to support and protect her, who understood what had happened without even needing words. This experience left a deep mark on Tasha's soul. It was not just an attempt to escape a physical trap, but a symbol of the struggle against fears, against the unknown, and the dark that sometimes lurks in the most ordinary places. She realized that a person's strength is revealed in moments like these, when, despite the danger, they do not give up and move forward, relying on their inner light and the support of their loved ones. The escape marked the beginning of a new phase in Tasha's life. She realized that she could not remain silent about what had happened, and that she had to help her community understand and overcome the evil that had crept into their neighborhood. Her story inspired her neighbors to unite, seek help, and address issues that had long been hidden in the shadows. Although the darkness of the night and her trials left scars on her soul, they also awakened new strength and confidence in Tasha. She knew that there would be many more difficulties ahead, but now she had the determination and understanding that no obstacles could stop her if she acted in the name of good and the protection of her loved ones. This escape was not only physical salvation, but also spiritual liberation. It gave Tasha a new outlook on life and herself, revealed hidden reserves, and made her believe in her strength and ability to resist the darkness. And although the memories of that night would remain with her forever, she now knew that there was light ahead, and with it, hope and the opportunity to build a future. After Tasha returned home and shared her ordeal, a wave of unrest and alertness began to spread throughout the neighborhood. Upon learning of what had happened, residents felt the need to get to the bottom of the matter and find out what was hidden behind the closed door of Jerry's house. Despite her fears and trauma, Tasha took the initiative to search for answers, because she understood that as long as the mystery remained unsolved, danger would hang over everyone. The local community came together. People began to share their observations. Some recalled strange noises coming from Jerry's house. Others told of mysterious figures and unexplained events in the neighborhood. Over time, it became clear that many had long noticed that something was wrong with Jerry, but fear or unwillingness to get involved had prevented them from taking action. Now the situation called for decisive measures. The key figure in the investigation was the village elder, a respected and wise man who knew the history of every house and every family. His knowledge and experience helped piece together fragments of the past and understand what could have caused such frightening phenomena. The elder suggested turning to a local healer, a man who, according to tradition and legend, possessed knowledge of the spiritual and mystical forces present in the area. The healer, an elderly man living on the outskirts of the district in a house surrounded by herbs and amulets, carefully examined the items brought from Jerry's house. Ancient books with incomprehensible symbols, carved figurines, and dried herbs. He carefully examined each artifact, recited several prayers and incantations, trying to understand the essence of what was happening. His conclusion was alarming. These items were connected to dark magic that Jerry had been trying to contain in order to protect the area from even worse disasters. It turned out that many years ago, an ancient cult had existed in this place, practicing rituals aimed at restraining a powerful spirit that brought disease and misfortune. Over time, knowledge of the cult was forgotten, but its effects continued to be felt, especially when the defenses weakened. Jerry, it turned out, was the keeper of this knowledge, and these artifacts. His home was a kind of barrier holding back evil. However, the dark forces proved stronger than he could have imagined. The old man's illness and strange behavior were the result of the gradual influence of evil energy that began to penetrate the barriers, threatening the entire area. Jerry's attempt to lock the door with a powerful lock and artifacts was a last resort, but the forces were too great, and he found himself trapped by magic. Realizing the danger, the community decided to perform a ritual to purify and expel the dark forces. Under the guidance of the elder and the healer, a ceremony was organized, which included the recitation of ancient spells, the lighting of a large bonfire, and the use of special herbs and symbols designed to destroy or drive away evil. All the residents of the area took part in the preparation and performance of the ritual, understanding that their unity was the key to their future. The ritual took place in a tense atmosphere. The flames of the bonfire rose high, and the sounds of the spells were powerful and soulful. Inexplicable phenomena occurred around the site. The wind changed direction. Shadows thickened as if resisting purification. However, the power of unity and the faith of the people proved stronger. As the ceremony continued, the dark energy began to disappear, and the atmosphere around became lighter and brighter. During this period, Jerry's house, which had long been a source of anxiety, gradually became free from the influence of darkness. Despite his illness, the old man began to recover, and his eyes were once again filled with light and warmth. For Tasha and her family, this became a symbol of new hope and strength that could overcome any challenge. The liberation of the neighborhood from dark forces not only brought peace and security, but also strengthened the sense of community and support among the residents. They realized that only by working together could they stand up to invisible threats and keep peace and harmony in their home. The story of Tasha and Jerry became a lesson and a warning, reminding us of the importance of helping and caring for one another. For Tasha, this experience was a turning point. Having overcome her fears and dangers, she gained new strength and understanding that there is no need to fear the unknown when there is support and love nearby. She realized that her role in the community was important and meaningful, that everyone could contribute to the common good. Over time, life in the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm, filled with the sounds of children's laughter, birds singing, and the noise of the streets. Tashi's house became a symbol of strength and protection, and the girl herself became an example of courage and resilience for her neighbors. Stories of her trials were passed from mouth to mouth, inspiring and warning future generations. The events that had taken place left a deep mark on the hearts of all who had witnessed the struggle. They served as a reminder that darkness is not eternal, and that light will always find a way if people do not lose their faith and unity. The mystery of Jerry, solved and overcome, became part of the neighborhood's history, a story of courage, love, and victory over evil. After the ritual of purification and expulsion of the dark forces was performed, long-awaited peace reigned in the area. People began to open up to each other again, establish connections, and restore their lost sense of security. For Tash, everything changed. She was no longer just a young girl living an ordinary life in a small suburb. Now she was seen as someone who had gone through darkness and returned to bring light. Despite everything that had happened, life went on as usual. Tasha returned to her studies, trying not to forget the lessons she had learned that night at Jerry's house. She became more involved in her neighborhood, helping to organize meetings and events aimed at strengthening the community and preventing similar tragedies in the future. Her story became an inspiration to many. However, although the outside world seemed calm, Tash remained troubled inside. The experience of encountering the unknown, mystical forces, had forever changed her perception of reality. Her nights were sometimes filled with dreams in which she found herself back in that house, where darkness tried to consume her. These dreams were not just a reflection of her fear, they were a signal that the fight was not over. From time to time, Tasha noticed strange things, barely perceptible rustling in the corners of the room, incomprehensible shadows flickering at the edge of her vision, and light, cold breaths that seemed unnatural. She understood that although the main evil had been banished, there were still forces in the world that were not so easy to defeat. Her inner voice told her that she needed to be vigilant and ready for new challenges. Through her interactions with the healer and the village elder, Tasha learned more about the subtle boundaries between the visible and invisible worlds. They told her about the need to maintain protection not only through rituals, but also through unity, faith, and love. This was a new understanding that the strength of the community was the key to maintaining balance and safety. Meanwhile, Jerry was gradually recovering. His health was improving, and he was becoming more open to communication. He told Tasha that for many years he had kept the secrets of the past, trying to protect the area from a curse that could destroy all life. His knowledge of ancient rituals and magic was invaluable to the community, and now he was eager to pass it on to those who were willing to learn and fight. Tasha began helping Jerry organize this knowledge, writing down stories and recipes, preserving traditions for future generations. Together, they organized a club where local residents could learn the basics of self-defense and spiritual balance. This marked the beginning of a new era in the life of the community, an era of knowledge, mutual support, and responsibility. Tasha's family also changed. Seeing how her daughter had grown into a strong person, Marie was proud of her achievements and supported her in all her endeavors. Jeremy became a more attentive and conscious child who was proud of his sister and tried to learn her resilience and courage. The house was filled with new meaning, where the fears of the past gradually dissolved in the light of hope. At school and college, Tasha became an example to her peers. Her story was often cited as proof that even in the most difficult trials, it is possible to find strength and emerge victorious. This inspired many young people not to be afraid of difficulties, but to face them with an open heart and determination. Over time, Tasha realized that her journey was just beginning. New challenges, new mysteries, and opportunities to do even more for her community and those in need awaited her. Her inner strength grew, and her faith in light and goodness became unshakable. She understood that darkness could return, but now she was ready to face it head-on. One warm spring evening, as the air filled with the scent of blossoming trees, Tasha stood on the porch of her house and looked up at the stars, reflecting on the path she had traveled. She felt grateful for the lessons of the past and the strength she had gained. In her heart burned the hope that her neighborhood and all the people who lived there would be able to preserve peace and light, no matter what trials they faced. And even though Tasha's story began with darkness and fear, it became a story of light and hope, a story about how even the darkest nights can be replaced by dawn if you believe, fight, and never lose your humanity.